Hi, Matt.
What's going on?
Not much. What's up?
Not much, not much.
So, we're here to talk about your Subaru today.
Yeah, we are.
Legacy GT. What year is it?
2005.
Okay. How long have you owned it?
3 years today. 3 years today.
Pretty good we're doing the video today,
Yeah,
then.
absolutely.
Okay.
Completely unplanned. So,
it's obviously kind of apart right now, but we'll get to that later.
yeah.
So, you've had it for 3 years now.
Yes.
Tell us about your history with it.
Well, long story short, the car has not been driving for, it would be 2 years, December 12th.
Okay.
I ended up buying the car, obviously 3 years ago, from a guy who lived semi-locally. Pretty good price. The car was already lowered on coilovers. It was already swapped over to a VF52 turbo off of the wide body. Besides that, car was pretty much stock, 3-inch from the turbo back. Nothing major. Came with a terrible Cobb OTS tune.
You changed that real quick or no?
Clearly we see there's an engine next to me, so we know OTS was in that car a little too long. But eventually, yes, I did end up getting it tuned on open source tuning. Got rid of the access port. I went through Marty from Low Life Tuning.
Okay. Let me see. Now, you obviously did that. How long did it take from then till now for, obviously, the car to kind of blow up?
So the car had a lot of underlying issues when I bought it. After only 4 months of ownership, I'd say, I ended up running into throwing constant codes for AVCS issues between the solenoids, the banjo bolts. The car ended up having 210,000 miles, original miles on the block and trans when the car blew up, but I ended up buying it at 165,000 miles. So definitely got a lot of abuse in that small amount of time.
And that is how you drive your cars.
That is how I drive everything I own, yes.
So, tell us about when it blew up.
So, I was actually on my way back after putting full coverage on it since I was going to be parking it for the winter. And I had my roommate and friend Sam with me. And I'm like, she hasn't been in the car since any of the upgrades have been done. Let's bring her for a rip. And it's a good time. A couple pulls in, and on our way back to a buddy's house, and I parked the car, and her husband proclaims that the car is on fire. I don't believe him. I shut the door, start walking away, and he insists, dude, pop the hood, pop the hood. Well, I pop the hood, and whoof, there it is. Ended up being the oil feed line to the turbo. When it was installed by whomever installed it, they did not even put the crush washers on it, so it was spritzing oil for a good amount of time.
People in the crush washers.
Yeah, that's not even the blow up, obviously. It ended up cracking, of course, ring lands on cylinders 4 and 2. Completely just, once they came out of the block, the only thing that was holding the piston together was the ring. As soon as the rings came out, it was shattered. The crank was completely wiped. All the bearings were completely wiped. Immediately prior to everything happening, my valve cover gasket went out, even though it was changed 5,000 miles before I bought it. So that was very interesting. The O2 sensor went out at the same time. It was just not a good time for this car.
Just a lot of bad things at once.
It's part of being a Subaru owner.
Let's see. The block next to you. What's up with that?
So this will be replacing the current block that is in here, which is by no means a used or abused block. But this one is originally, the case halves are EJ251 case halves. They were overboard out 0.5, I believe. They were overboard 0.5. Forged pistons. They will be getting the nitrate-coated STI crank, ACL bearings, and forged rods to go with it, which is why it's sitting here. It's currently different setup than what I would really like, and those remaining parts are in this freshly built block here instead.
So you're going to be tearing that out.
I will be pulling that block out, yes. I'll be tearing this block back apart, and it's going to be getting the best of both blocks, really. So it'll definitely be a lot more stout.
Good. Now that we've hit on that, what was your plan for when you first started this car?
When I bought it?
Yeah.
So I knew absolutely nothing. I was like, wow, you know, I've heard Subarus are reliable. I heard that Subarus are fun. I also heard that Subarus are fast. Yeah, so it was definitely fun. I at the time thought it was fast. That is simply because this was my first project car, let alone first boosted car. Brand new to the platform. I had just left a 99 Honda Accord. So jumping into something like this, for me, was like, wow, I've got a rocket ship, you know? I knew nothing about cars. I hadn't even changed a tire on a car yet. I'd never jacked a car up. And I'd like to say I didn't get in a little over my head, but little bit. Just a smidge.
A little bit.
Yeah, so it was not what I was expecting whatsoever.
Yep.
But it's been a journey.
Yeah?
It's been a learning process.
Went from not changing a tire to having an engine block next to you.
And the one I built behind me. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Unfortunate.
Where do you think you're going?
So it's a very meh area. We don't have any numbers to go with it, but the goal is obviously, of course, I want to throw this block in. Thing is, I will not be using the EJ255 heads that were on the car. Those are long gone. Exhaust valves were not very happy. So I ended up wanting to be a little different. I wanted to go with a naturally aspirated turbo build. So I ended up throwing in single cam heads off of an EJ251. They were freshly machined. They were completely refreshed prior to being thrown in. So I figured see what kind of power we can put out on that. Tacked on with the GTX 35R back there. It's probably a little oversized for the engine, but hopefully with the slight increase in displacement, this will be able to spool me up a little bit better. Ultimately, I would love to see 500 wheel. Very unlikely, very, very, very unlikely. Probably impossible on these heads, with them being single cam, but that's far from the only limiting factor with the infamous glass Subaru 5-speed, with 210,000 original miles. So
you've got the original 5-speed in the car still.
Yes, I do.
Any issues so far, or just kind of
no, it's always shifted great. No issues with the transmission. Only issue I ever had was the roller pin in the linkage braking when I ended up popping it out of gear into neutral. I had a car show to go to the next day. Subaru didn't have the part in stock, so I just put a bolt in with a nut, and it shifted, but it was like mixing a pot of soup. It was kind of like this when it was in gear. You'd hit someone in the kneecap with a weighted shift knob when going around turns. The car became known as the soup kitchen for a bit, but besides that, transmission's always been solid. It was a little too torquey for the ACT Stage 1 clutch that was originally in the car. Ended up going with a Stage 3 6-puck, and it's leg day every day with that.
How's bleeding it?
Bleeding it it's like every other Subaru clutch. It's not fun.
No.
Especially when you got chicken legs.
You always talk about a rear-wheel drive conversion with me.
Listen, I don't know if I'm actually gonna do it. I don't know if I'm gonna do it. I'd love to, alright? All my all the homies want to go sliding. One of them just bought an RX-7, an FC that's 302 swapped. That thing's kind of sick. My other buddy wants to buy a Beamer. I mean,
I also would like to buy a Beamer.
yeah, and twin turbo VR6 swap.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. I kind of want to jump on board with it to an extent because I think it would be a blast. But there's also the fact of still 5-speed glass transmission, terrible axles. But the point of me building the car the way I have been wanting to is not for that. I want horsepower. I want horsepower, and I want to, I don't know, kind of have a sleeper car in essence. I mean, the Legacy GT, it's kind of a grandma-looking car to begin with. It's clean, whatever, but, you know, I feel like it would just be a cool car to have around.
Absolutely. So you wanted to show off some of the stuff inside the engine bay?
Sure.
Yeah?
I mean, it's not much to it. It's just, overall, what's currently in the bay is an EJ255 original set of case halves with the STN nitride coated crank, original bore size pistons that are forged, as well as the rods, ACL bearings, the EJ251 heads, Killer Bee oil pickup. I want the GTX 35R, decapped LS flex fuel injectors. They decap out to about 1050s roughly, I believe. Maybe 800. Don't really remember at the moment. It has the long runners from the naturally aspirated EJ253 for the intake manifold. Still debating on inverting it. Front mount intercooler setup has to be tweaked. 100% atmospheric blow-off valve. External wastegate's going to be dumping through the hood. And besides that, it's got the Mishimoto radiator, original fan shrouds, and I believe they were EJ251 fuel rails, actually. Originally I went with the swap with the manifold so I can put top feed injectors in and delete the TGVs, and it honestly made front mounting the car a lot easier in terms of the intercooler and all that stuff. Overall, it ran great on that setup, but with the much larger turbo being on a raised pedestal in comparison to the stock turbo location, everything has to be relocated. The intercooler I had on here had the inlet and outlet on the same side, so you need to get inlet and outlet on opposite sides now. But not much to it besides that.
Alrighty, we moved the camera, and now you can kind of see everything in the engine bay.
Yeah, so like I was mentioning earlier, you have the long runner 253 manifold, super common swap. They just flow better than the plastic garbage that comes on the 255s to begin with. If you look down here, you'll see I also went with the VAG red top coil packs on here. Even while lifting the engine and everything to put those in was absolutely terrible. I'll be honest, the ABS module gets in the way of a lot of different things. Big thing that you'll notice here is going to be the drive-by cable throttle body. Reasoning behind that is with the EJ251, with them being single cam, they only have the one cam position sensor. And it's not something you can just code out on the 32-bit ECU. So I figured, why not swap to 16-bit? Those are the ones that you'll find in the bug eyes in the United States. So the big reasoning for swapping to the 16-bit management is because there's a difference with the cam position sensors that are on the 255 heads as opposed to the 251 heads. You're going to have one that's going to be Hall's effect, the other one's going to be variable reluctance. And unfortunately, due to the cams themselves being completely different, as well as the blocks themselves, you're not really going to be able to swap the sensor in and out of just the heads like that. So obviously, of course, there's no AVCS on these heads either. So it's really going to eliminate a lot of potential issues that can arise, more parts to break. So like I said earlier with the AVCS, I had issues with my original 255 setup with those. I ended up replacing the solenoids. It was still running into issues. The left side was advancing much faster than the right side, and then eventually they just really weren't happy. Turns out the banjo bolt screens were completely clogged up. Yeah, the banjo bolt screens were still in there even after about 200,000 miles at that point. So naturally, like you'd expect, the original VF52 that was swapped in the car ended up blowing up as well. Ended up replacing it, and then that's when everything with the fire happened, and I figured to go with something bigger. GTX 35R. Definitely expecting a good amount of lag, but we'll end up seeing how that goes. Of course, the Mishimoto radiator I mentioned earlier. And if you look here, you'll see the fuel rails off of what I believe was from a 98 Forester. And you'll see the injectors here, which I ended up properly splicing into the harness that I will be using on here. Of course, same's gonna go for the coil packs and the inlet air temp sensor that's in the manifold off of a Volkswagen Audi 1.8T, because they have a tendency to do things a lot better than Subaru for a multitude of reasons. Of course, you'll also notice AC is gone, and don't mind the terrible black paint of this dummy alternator that's just here to mock everything up. But besides that, the only issue I'm foreseeing at the moment is just going to be figuring out plumbing properly for the oil feed off the block into the galley, as well as being capable of putting an oil pressure sensor in there without going into the rear of the block instead. Wastegate's going to be right off the up pipe here, right through the hood. Of course, there's going to be a turbo blanket on here. I don't really feel like burning yet another harness. I've done it once in this car, once in another vehicle of mine, and I'm hoping to not have to deal with that again. And of course, where the coolant, the higher coolant reservoir would sit is actually going to be getting relocated off to the side over there. I made a bracket already for it. It's painted up. It just needs to be bolted in, and that'll be all set. But of course, this is all coming out, and everything is going to be getting changed up. Marty, good buddy of mine and owner of Low Life Tuning, ended up actually fabbing up the up pipe on the vehicle, as well as the down pipe from the V-band straight back into the original exhaust it had on it for the catback, which was the MagnaFlow 3-inch. It was definitely a little too loud, and it's going to be very interesting to hear this thing spool up and sound like a Freightliner. I don't really have much else for that. I mean, unless talking about the mounts that are in the car, full solid mounts all throughout. Between the pitch stop, trans mount was absolutely petrified on this thing. It's original, the one that was in there. The engine mounts were definitely a nice touch. I'm very excited to feel how this thing rides after that. Obviously, the first goal is just get the car running at this point. It's been down a little too long. Plans continuously change based off of my wants and needs in comparison to what is capable. But we'll really see where the build ends up going, and very excited for it.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt.
Of course.